Right now, if you asked most people to name the scariest animal on the planet, you'd probably hear answers involving sharks, lions, venomous snakes, or maybe large aggressive predators like grizzly bears. Very few people would immediately think to name their own species. But research examining how wild animals actually perceive and respond to different potential threats reveals something truly striking. Humans consistently rank as the single most feared, most consistently avoided species across an enormous range of different wildlife populations, frequently outranking even the most dangerous natural predators those same animals regularly encounter within their own specific ecosystem. So, why exactly are humans, physically unimpressive as we are compared to most large predators, considered the scariest animal on the planet from the perspective of the wildlife actually living alongside us? Let's dig into this properly, because the answer connects directly to research already explored in other discussions regarding how wild animals generally perceive humans, and it reveals something worth taking seriously about humanity's actual ecological role and impact, extending well beyond simple physical strength or predatory capability alone. Let's start with the specific research findings worth establishing clearly up front because they represent seriously striking, well documented evidence worth taking seriously. Multiple research studies conducted across different ecosystems and different specific wildlife populations have consistently found that a wide range of animals, from large predators like lions and leopards down to considerably smaller prey species, respond with significantly greater fear and avoidance behavior toward the sound of human voices compared to the sound of actual predator vocalizations, including the roars of lions and other remarkably dangerous apex predators those same animals regularly encounter within their own specific natural environment. This finding has led researchers to describe humans as functioning like a kind of super predator within the broader ecological framework these animals actually experience and respond to on an ongoing basis. This detail is worth sitting with directly, because it fundamentally challenges the common, intuitive assumption that physical strength, speed, or natural predatory equipment like claws and sharp teeth determine which species wildlife populations consider most actually threatening and worth actively avoiding. Humans, without any weapons or tools, are physically unimpressive compared to a truly dangerous natural predator like a lion. Yet, wildlife populations consistently treat humans as considerably more threatening, suggesting something other than simple physical predatory capability is actually driving this consistent, well documented pattern of heightened fear and avoidance. Let's talk about why humans specifically have earned this particular reputation, because understanding the underlying reasons helps explain this seriously counterintuitive research finding in considerably more depth. Unlike natural predators, which generally hunt in a reasonably predictable, consistent manner, and generally only kill what they specifically need for immediate survival, human hunting and resource extraction has historically proven considerably more unpredictable, more widespread, and often considerably more lethal and destructive relative to the specific population size of whatever species is actually being targeted or affected. Humans have historically hunted using tools and weapons capable of killing from a considerable distance, have hunted across dramatically larger geographic ranges than most natural predators typically cover, and have frequently hunted or otherwise affected animal populations in ways that don't necessarily correlate with immediate survival need, including hunting for sport, trade, or various other cultural and economic reasons entirely disconnected from basic nutritional necessity. This combination of factors, unpredictability, extended range, and a historical pattern of killing considerably beyond immediate survival need, likely explains why wildlife populations have evolved to treat human presence as an unusually significant, consistently elevated threat, distinct from and generally exceeding their learned fear response toward remarkably dangerous natural predators they've coexisted with and adapted to across a considerably longer evolutionary time frame. Let's talk about the specific experimental evidence supporting this finding in more detail too, because grounding this discussion in concrete research methodology helps move beyond general description into actually rigorous, well-documented scientific evidence. One particularly well-known study, conducted across a South African national park, involved playing recorded human voices, speaking calmly in an ordinary conversational tone, near watering holes regularly frequented by a wide range of different wildlife species, directly comparing animal reactions to these human voice recordings against recordings of lion vocalizations, gunshots, and hunting dog sounds. The results showed that animals, including large, physically powerful species like leopards, rhinos, and elephants, fled from the sound of ordinary human voices considerably more frequently and considerably more quickly compared to how they responded to the sounds specifically associated with actual predation and active hunting threat. This finding has since been replicated across multiple additional studies conducted in different specific ecosystems and involving different specific wildlife populations, consistently finding this same basic pattern. Human presence. Even in its most passive, seemingly non-threatening auditory form, a person simply speaking in an ordinary, calm, conversational tone consistently triggers a stronger avoidance and fear response compared to direct evidence of genuine predatory threat and danger from the animal's own natural predators. Let's talk about the broader ecological consequences of this widespread, well-documented fear response too, because this represents an important, practically significant dimension of this topic worth exploring specifically, extending well beyond simply confirming an interesting research finding in isolation. Researchers studying this phenomenon have found that this consistent, elevated fear response toward humans appears to be measurably reshaping wildlife behavior patterns on a fairly significant ecological scale, altering when and where various animal species feel safe enough to feed, drink water, and generally go about their ordinary daily activities and behavior. This means human presence within a given ecosystem, entirely independent of whether active hunting or any other direct, immediate threat is actually occurring in that specific moment, appears to be functioning as its own kind of significant, ongoing environmental pressure, reshaping wildlife behavior patterns across an ecosystem simply through the animal's learned, evolved association between human presence and genuine elevated danger. Let's talk about how this specific fear response actually develops and gets transmitted within wildlife populations too, because this represents an interesting behavioral question worth exploring in more depth. Given that individual wild animals obviously don't have access to formal historical records regarding humanity's broader hunting practices and environmental impact across many generations, this widespread, remarkably consistent fear response likely develops through a combination of genuine direct learning, individual animals having personally experienced negative, dangerous encounters with humans, and social learning. Younger or less experienced animals observing and learning from the fear responses and avoidance behavior displayed by more experienced members of their own social group or species. Some evidence also suggests at least some degree of this fear response may become at least partially instinctive over sufficiently long periods of sustained selective pressure, with populations facing consistent, significant human-related danger over many successive generations, potentially developing an increasingly ingrained, less purely learned avoidance response passed down and reinforced across successive generations. Let's talk about specific individual species case studies in more detail too, because grounding this broader pattern in concrete, specific examples helps illustrate exactly how consistently and how dramatically this fear response actually manifests across different types of wildlife. Research on mesopredators, meaning mid-sized predator species like raccoons, foxes, and badgers, has found that these particular animals show significantly reduced activity and foraging behavior specifically in areas with higher human presence, even when no direct active hunting or threat is actually occurring in that specific moment or location. Some researchers studying this phenomenon have described it using the term landscape of fear, referring to how the mere ongoing possibility of human presence effectively reshapes an entire area's usable habitat from a given animal's own behavioral perspective, functionally shrinking the amount of territory that species feels safe enough to actively use for feeding, denning, and other essential daily activities, even in the complete absence of any actual, immediate human threat occurring in real time. This concept of a landscape of fear is worth exploring in a bit more depth, because it represents a particularly useful, well-documented framework for understanding the broader ecological consequences already touched on earlier in this discussion. Just as prey animals have long been documented altering their behavior based on the mere possibility of encountering a natural predator within a given territory, regardless of whether that specific predator happens to be present at any particular moment. Research increasingly shows that an extraordinarily wide range of wildlife species apply this same basic behavioral principle specifically to human presence, treating areas with even moderate, regular human activity as functionally more dangerous and less desirable compared to areas with minimal human presence. even when direct hunting or other active threats aren't actually occurring in that specific location on any regular, consistent basis. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Let's talk about human scent specifically too, because this represents an important, frequently overlooked sensory dimension of this broader topic worth exploring specifically. Beyond the auditory research already discussed extensively regarding human voices, several studies have found that many wildlife species also show significant avoidance behavior specifically in response to human scent alone, even without any accompanying visual or auditory cues present. This finding is particularly significant because it demonstrates that this widespread fear response isn't purely triggered by direct, immediate sensory contact with an actual visible or audible human. Even indirect evidence of relatively recent human presence, detected purely through scent, appears sufficient to trigger measurable avoidance behavior in numerous different wildlife species, further reinforcing just how deeply and how broadly this particular fear response has become embedded within these animals' overall behavioral and perceptual systems. Let's talk about how this pattern compares to how these same wildlife populations respond to actual apex predators within their specific ecosystem too, because this direct comparison helps make the core finding of this entire topic considerably more concrete and vivid. In ecosystems containing truly formidable natural apex predators, lions in parts of Africa, tigers in parts of Asia, and various other large, powerful predator species elsewhere, prey species have obviously evolved substantial, sophisticated fear responses and avoidance behaviors specifically toward these particular natural predators. Given the extremely long evolutionary history of direct predator-prey interaction involved. Yet, even within these same specific ecosystems, where seriously dangerous natural apex predators are already present and already well known to local wildlife populations through countless generations of direct evolutionary interaction and adaptation, research consistently finds that human presence still triggers an equal or often even stronger fear and avoidance response. Despite humans having no natural claws, powerful jaws, exceptional speed, or any other typical natural predatory equipment whatsoever. This comparison is worth sitting with directly, because it represents remarkably compelling evidence that whatever specifically makes humans so consistently frightening to wildlife populations has nothing to do with our own natural individual physical capability as predators and everything to do with something else entirely, likely connected to the specific combination of unpredictability, extended range, and disproportionate lethality relative to genuine survival need already discussed at some length earlier in this broader topic. Let's talk about the specific historical timeline of humanity's growing ecological impact, too, because this represents useful additional context worth exploring specifically, helping to properly ground this discussion within humanity's actual broader evolutionary and historical trajectory. Evidence from various regions around the world suggests that significant, measurable ecological impacts directly attributable to human hunting and environmental modification activity have been documented stretching back tens of thousands of years, including well-documented cases connecting human arrival in a previously unpopulated region directly to significant, measurable declines in local large animal populations shortly afterward. This detail suggests the wildlife fear response toward humans currently being discussed and documented by modern researchers likely has considerably deep, actually ancient evolutionary roots, rather than representing some kind of purely recent phenomenon connected only to modern human technology, industrial development, or contemporary environmental impact specifically. Let's talk about how conservation researchers are actually applying this specific research finding in practical, real-world contexts too, because this represents an important, practically significant application worth exploring before wrapping up this broader discussion. Understanding exactly how strongly and how consistently wildlife populations respond to human presence has proven directly valuable for conservation planning and wildlife management more broadly, helping researchers and conservation professionals better understand and predict how different specific types and levels of human activity, tourism, research presence, or nearby human settlement are likely to affect wildlife behavior and habitat use within a given protected area or conservation zone. This kind of practical applied research has directly informed decisions regarding conservation area design, tourism management policy, and various other practical conservation strategies specifically aimed at minimizing unintended, disruptive human impact on sensitive wildlife populations, representing a valuable, really practical application of the broader scientific research already discussed extensively throughout this topic. Let's talk about whether this pattern applies identically across every single human culture and historical context too, because it's worth acknowledging honestly that this specific research finding doesn't necessarily suggest every single human population throughout history has interacted with wildlife in an identically disruptive, threatening manner. Various indigenous and traditional human communities around the world have historically maintained considerably more sustainable, balanced relationships with local wildlife populations, sometimes maintained across many successive generations, suggesting the broader pattern of human ecological disruption discussed throughout this topic likely varies considerably depending on specific historical, cultural, and economic factors, rather than representing some kind of fixed, universal, unavoidable feature of human behavior, applying identically and uniformly across every single human population and historical period without any meaningful exception or variation whatsoever. Let's talk about how this pattern varies across different specific human populations and historical contexts too, because this represents an important, nuanced detail worth exploring specifically, echoing similar patterns of variation already discussed in other explorations of how animals specifically perceive different human populations based on historical interaction patterns. Research on elephant behavior specifically has found that elephants can distinguish between different human populations based on scent and clothing patterns, showing measurably different fear and defensive responses toward groups historically associated with hunting elephants specifically, compared to groups with a more neutral or non-threatening historical relationship and interaction pattern with elephants in that specific region. This detail reinforces an important point worth carrying through this entire discussion. The widespread fear response toward humans documented throughout this topic isn't some kind of simple, undifferentiated reaction to humans as an entirely uniform, single category. It reflects a considerably more nuanced, evidence-based response, shaped by each specific wildlife population's own particular accumulated historical experience with the specific human populations they've actually encountered within their own particular region and historical context. Let's talk about how domesticated and habituated animals differ from wild populations in this specific regard too, because this represents an important, relevant contrast worth exploring specifically. Animals that have been domesticated or that have developed extensive positive interaction history with specific humans, discussed at considerably greater length in other explorations of how trust develops between animals and specific humans over time, obviously don't display this same generalized elevated fear response toward humans as a broad category. This detail is worth including because it demonstrates that this widespread super predator fear response specifically applies to wild animal populations without extensive positive human interaction history, rather than representing some kind of fixed, unchangeable biological response applying identically and permanently to literally every single animal regardless of that specific animal's own particular individual and cumulative experience with humans throughout its own personal lifetime. Let's talk about what this research actually suggests about humanity's broader ecological role and historical impact too, because this represents an important, somewhat sobering reflection worth including before wrapping up this discussion. This consistent, well-documented pattern of wildlife populations treating humans as more truly threatening than their own natural predators reflects something worth taking seriously about humanity's actual historical and ongoing ecological impact and footprint. Humans have fundamentally, measurably reshaped ecosystems across virtually the entire planet through hunting, habitat modification, and various other forms of environmental impact on a scale and with a level of consistency that few, if any, natural predator species have ever achieved throughout the broader history of life on Earth. This research finding, while sometimes discussed in a purely curious, almost entertaining context, actually reflects something seriously significant and worth taking seriously regarding humanity's outsized, historically unprecedented ecological influence and impact across virtually every ecosystem our species has come into sustained contact with throughout our entire history. Let's talk about the interesting irony worth appreciating within this whole broader topic, too, because it's worth acknowledging directly before wrapping up this entire discussion. Most humans, going about their own ordinary daily lives, don't generally think of themselves or their own species as particularly threatening or dangerous, especially compared to the popular cultural image of fearsome predators like sharks or lions that so consistently dominates popular discussion regarding which animals are actually the most frightening or dangerous. Yet the accumulated, carefully documented perspective of wildlife populations themselves, built from countless individual and collective encounters across many generations, tells a strikingly different, considerably more sobering story, one where humans consistently occupy the single most feared position within the entire natural world. Regardless of how unthreatening any individual human being might personally feel or actually intend to be in any given specific moment or encounter. Let's zoom out and pull all of these different threads together, because the full picture of why humans are considered the scariest animal on Earth, at least from the perspective of the wildlife actually sharing our planet, turns out to reflect something considerably more significant than simple curiosity or entertaining trivia alone. Multiple well-documented research studies consistently confirm that a wide range of wildlife species, including some of the most physically powerful and dangerous natural predators on the planet, display measurably greater fear and avoidance behavior toward humans compared to their own natural predators. A pattern that likely reflects humanity's historically unpredictable hunting patterns, extended geographic range, and pattern of killing considerably beyond immediate survival necessity. This widespread fear response appears to be measurably reshaping wildlife behavior patterns across entire ecosystems, representing a significant, ongoing environmental and ecological pressure in its own right, entirely independent of whether any specific, immediate hunting or human-related threat is actually occurring in any given moment. So, the next time nature documentaries or casual conversation frame lions, sharks, or other powerful natural predators as the planet's scariest animals, it's worth remembering that the actual wildlife sharing this planet with us appears to have already quietly reached a somewhat different, considerably more sobering conclusion, one worth taking seriously rather than dismissing as simple curiosity or interesting trivia alone, which leaves an interesting thought worth sitting with. If wild animals across such an enormous range of different species and ecosystems have independently, consistently concluded that humans represent the single most significant threat within their entire environment, considerably exceeding even their own most dangerous natural predators, what does that suggest about how differently we might need to think about humanity's actual role and impact within the broader natural world, compared to how we typically casually think about ourselves within that same broader ecological picture?